Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here in person and online. My name is Gloria Todd. Thank you for your patience and issue. But first and foremost, I'd like to thank the staff here at Philanthropy DMV. Please give them a warm up. Thank you all so much. And Celeste, who is playing the program, this whole event. My name is Gloria Todd. I'm the interim CEO here at Philanthropy DMV. We are a 33-year-old organization that was founded as a network of grant makers in the DC, Maryland, Virginia community. We have rebranded as Philanthropy DMV, and we are still on mission. Our network is of the grant making community. So we're talking public, private, and philanthropic, and that's what this room is made of today. Today, we are hosting an important conversation where I see most of our board members here, so I appreciate them being here. We have about 30 people logged on and another 20, 30 people here and counting. We represent about 88 members, again, across those sectors and funding. And actually what I really want to call out is 500 practitioners. So we really work to help the practitioners in the practice of philanthropy to understand what the landscape looks like in this industry. And so today we have experts both in legal and in the funding community and the business community as it relates to DEI rollbacks and how that, what the implications are. So we have an esteemed panel. And I'm going to start it with the moderator who will be fielding questions online and here we are going to put out some cue cards so that you guys can ask your questions. And Jamila White and Blackley, which is based in Ward 8. It's a nonprofit organization that focuses on liberation and economic justice. We'll be fielding the questions so that she can pose that to our panelists. So we're going to do this in two parts and afterwards the folks that are in person get to enjoy some wine. I'd like to thank Eaton House for their sponsorship of this event. And I think I may have covered everything. Madam Chair, did I miss anything? Okay. Yes, I did take a extra word. I know everyone's here. Please raise your hand. All women. There you go. I thought the majority of them are here. We are really coming in this way. Okay, so without further ado, Jamila will bring up our first panel.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Give me a round of applause for Gloria, the director of Philanthropy DMV. Thank you, everybody. Happy Wednesday, happy hump day. Thank you for coming out. I want to first welcome up my panelists for this great conversation. I want to welcome Andre Perry and Olivia. You want to come up the same part, right? Yeah, come on, get president on hand and applause. We have Olivia Sanders and Andre Perry, who will self-introduce themselves. We'll have about 20 minutes for this conversation, and we want this to be interactive. We want this to really be a discussion. So we're going to welcome everyone in the audience to ask questions, to engage. We have some, Kelsey, are you going to help us with those flashcards? Yeah, we have some flashcards where you'll be able to ask questions for. And then I'm looking at my phone because I'm monitoring the chat. So if you are in the chat, please go ahead and ask your questions because we're going to take questions throughout. We're going to have about 20 minutes before we do a flip and switch. And we're going to bring our second panel up here. So thank you, everyone. As Gloria said, right now we're in a critical moment in our country, in our history. We're in a moment of transition. We're in a moment of potential liberation, and we see the attacks that are happening on that. If you all have not been watching, a lot of organizations, primarily organizations run by people of color and women, have been under attack for trying to spread equity and justice, especially when it comes to economic equity and economic justice. And they've been being attacked by folks who don't want that inclusion, folks who want the power dynamics to stay, folks who want to continue hoarding resources, right? And so we have to fight against that. And one of the most famous cases that we are going to talk about today is the Fearless Fund, which Olivia is going to go into a lot more. But now is the time to double down. Now is the time to double down our commitment to Black communities, to people of color communities, to communities around the district, around the DMV that have been disinvested, right? So I'm joining you from the Great Ward 8 Anacostia to be exact, where we house the largest concentration of Black businesses in the district. That's something to clap for, right? And at the same time, businesses east of the Anacostia River, that's Ward 7 and 8, that has the most black businesses, we receive less than 3% of total investment from CDFIs. Most of our businesses are not actually businesses, we're nonprofits in the service delivery, which is not giving us the economic base to create jobs, to break some of the barriers we have. We know that black businesses primarily hire black people. East of the river, we have estimated 20% adult unemployment. We need jobs. We need self-determination. We need investment. And so part of our responsibility is making sure people's needs are being met, but also making sure we're giving them the tools they need for self-determination, the tools they need to break generational curses, generational poverty that's outside of many of our controls. And we need philanthropy to do that. We need everyone, public-private partnership and community to be able to do that. So this conversation, we're gonna dig more into that today. So we're gonna start with Andre and Gary, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. Let's give Andre a round of applause. John, we're gonna ask you to self-introduce yourself
Yes.
before you go into, but my question I love to ask everybody, once you're introducing yourself, what is it that you're trying to solve for? What is it you're working for, trying to solve for and working?
Well, in general, I try to restore the value or restore the equity that's been extracted by racism. Most people know me through my research on housing devaluation. We found that homes in black neighborhoods are underpriced by 23%, about 48,000 per home. Cumulatively, there's about 156 billion in lost equity across the country. In the DMV, it averages out to about 50,000 per home in the area. And we know that that equity is the reason why so many people can lift themselves up by their real bootstraps. That 156 billion is the equivalent of about 4 million black-owned businesses based upon the average amount black people used to start their firms. It would have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based upon the average amount of a four-year public education. Replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan 3,000 times over. It's double the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis. It's a big number. But I say all that to say that I try to restore the value that equity that's extracted without anyone wearing a white hood, without anyone carrying a tiki torch, through the normal everyday practices of things like appraising, assessments, and other things. So that's what I try to follow.
Thank you so much, Andre. Olivia, let's do an introduction of you and ask you the same question. What are you solving for?
Thank you. I'm Olivia Sedgwick, Council of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law here in DC, right down the street. The problem that I'm solving for, if I can speak frankly, I'm trying to work myself out of job. I think that the crisis of oppression that Black people in this country have experienced historically since its founding is absurd and abhorrent, that we continue to experience in a variety of ways since Reconstruction, the way that that oppression has kind of flipped and turned and done a little do-si-do around to impact our lives beyond the physical, right? And we see it day in and day out. Andre just kind of explained that a bit cursorily. And so I have committed my work, my personal work and my professional work to improving the quality of life of Black people everywhere, especially in the United States. Because when we solve for our problems, we solve for everybody's problem. When we are able to speak truth to power concerning Black people, we're able to speak truth to power to every community, every marginalized group, no matter how we show up. And we're even able to speak today concerning White folks as well. Because as Franz Fanon says, that oppression is visited upon those who are oppressed as well as the oppressed, right? And it's our duty to ensure that as the oppressed, the historically marginalized, that we do not become our oppressor, right? So we are constantly engaged in this practice of ensuring that we are working from a policy perspective, a litigation perspective, a philanthropic perspective, and any other sector, to ensure that the quality of life of Black folks in this country is improved. And by doing so, we improve that of everyone else. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you, Olivia. I'm glad you noted that, when we solve for Black, we're gonna be solving for other, challenges and barriers, and we take an intersectional approach with that. But Andre, I want to start with you. Can you, help us to get grounded, to understand, the data, to understand the true kind of impact of the economic and social disparity that we're facing now?
Yeah, I was told in the grad student, never start a conversation with a scatter plot. But that's exactly what I'm gonna do.
Next one.
So here's the scatter plot, right? Yeah, hopefully you can see it over there. Now, this is a scatter plot of well-being, the correlation of well-being on that x-axis of that horizontal row, that bottom row. That's Black well-being. And on the vertical axis, the y-axis, that's white well-being. Now, if you were a statistician, but you don't necessarily have to be, that upward slope, that shows that these two things are positively correlated. I want to start there just to push back against this idea that if you support well-being of one group, you're taking away from another. So I wanted to start there. I didn't want to end there because a lot of the attacks currently are predicated on this notion of a zero-sum sort of game, racial game, that if you invest in people who've been discriminated against, you're somehow taking away from another group. This is not the case. When we invest, and I just showed Black versus white, I need to move beyond the Black-white frame. With that said, if you invest in low wealth people of any stripe, you're investing in the greater good. So we'll move to the next slide. I just want to show a reason why I brought up wealth. Wealth is the number one predictor for most social outcomes, whether you're talking about education, health, a number of other social outcomes. It's a big predictor. So I wanted to show you where we stand on the overall average wealth among the various groups. Black around 45,000, non-white Hispanic 62,000, white 285,000, and that dreaded other category, Asian, Native American, Pacific Islander, $536,000. You see the differences. Now, in each of these categories, this is an increase in each racial category. Wealth is actually increasing among Black, white, and Latino families. So next slide, please. I just want to. This is a slide showing where that wealth is coming from. So when it comes to Black wealth, and you can see here the orange bar, pay attention to the word orange bar, that represents housing equity. You can see that when it comes to Black wealth, which is that second column, it is highly dependent upon housing equity. Second is business equity. I always got to remind people, most people start their businesses using the equity in their homes. So when you have greater home ownership, you have greater housing equity, you'll generally have more business. But you can see, actually, wealth is growing the fastest among Black people in certain categories. Now, for white and other, you can see it's more evenly distributed. The big difference between Black and white in this context is the difference in stock equity. And I'll get to that in a second. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this slide, again, shows the growth of wealth since we've been measuring wealth in 1989 approximately. You see black wealth and the blue represented in blue, Hispanic orange, other category Asian, the Native American, Pacific Islanders, and the other green. All those areas are growing. But why we must, and you will hear people talk about wealth is growing, the administration is talking about that. But why we have to pay attention to historic discrimination will be revealed when we layer white wealth. Please go to the next slide. You can see between the two, go forward again, that white wealth is growing significantly at a much exponentially, at a much greater rate, because white families on average, not all, white families on average were able to accrue more wealth over time and pass on those intergenerational wealth transfers over time. And they have more discretionary income to largely put in the stock market where you can see this growth. So yes, black wealth, brown wealth is growing, but so is the wealth gap, right? Why this is important, I want to just to level set this, is that when we're talking about this gap, this is why what we're trying to do is make up for the gap. Now, I want to preface, and I say this all the time, we're not going to nonprofit our way out of these problems. We are not. And a lot of folks, funders, I love my funders, please. I operate the Center for Community Uplift of Brokenness. Please talk to me now. Right? With that said, we're not going to nonprofit our way out of these problems. This wealth gap is extremely calculable. This requires a structural change in our economy. Next slide, please. Now, I just want to show you that wealth and well-being are correlated. That blue bar represents striving, the highest level of well-being. The orange bar represents struggling or suffering, the lowest level of well-being. And on the x-axis at the bottom row, that's the wealth quintile. So if you read from left to right, as wealth go up, you can see thriving goes up and suffering goes down. So what we're trying to do ultimately is to seed activities that will build wealth. Black businesses, Black people represent about 14% of the population, but only 2% of employer firms. Why that is important? Black, brown, Asian, and white sole proprietorships are around the same percentage. But where inequality shows up is in the number of employer firms with more than one employee. Right? And so when we are investing in businesses, what we're really trying to do is scale them to a point where they can hire more people. Right? So yes, we should invest in those, and we should see philanthropy invest in those. More importantly, we should see corporations invest in those. We should see government subsidy invest in those businesses. We should constantly be trying to restore the equity that's been extracted or denied to these groups over time. So I'm going to leave it there. But the reason why we are seeing efforts to invest in Black businesses in particular is because of that earlier wealth gap that I showed earlier. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andre. We want to take a moment to see if anyone has any questions for Andre before we go over to Olivia. Any questions? Let me see any postcards.
Go for it. I can repeat the question. Yes, we can get a copy of the slide. Actually, and you can also get a copy of the reports that they're associated with.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can break it down by this region, so we can look at wealth and thriving and all these other issues in the DMV area. And I apologize, I should have shown that those data.
Let me, yeah, I'm gonna have to repeat it so people in the audience can hear.
Affirmative question about today, of this region, you speak with one of them. One of the worst 5 biggest things in that county. So we're not doing good. So just.
So-
And DC has one of the greatest racial wealth gaps in this country. When you think about the population of DC, Washington region having the highest concentration of Black homeowners, but also some of the highest concentrations of Black poverty.
No, but I do want to say this,
Right.
because one of the things, this is what I'm passionate. We also need to lead with assets. That the DMV is also one of the, has some of the longest life expectancy of Black people. We also have, some of the greatest incomes of people of color. Well, economic mobility is another issue. It's about the ability for one generation to surpass the other. Now, the only reason I say that is because when we lead with disparity, you don't invest in the people in need most. Like, when no one invests in problems, period. What ends up happening when you lead with disparity, in my opinion, you end up investing in people to fix others. And so for me, the DMV has sort of the building blocks for success. We have the people, we have the ability, just need the investment.
Andre, we are, some of the questions on the chat that are coming through. Just, can we get the slides? One thing before we move on from you, you guys are talking about, in the back.
Yeah, I had more of a technical question. What is the definition of well-being or thriving? I think that.
Yep. The definition of well-being or thriving, that's the question of what we're using. We use the Gallup Share Care survey data that's distributed actually around the world. Most people hear about it like once a year when we come up. We're the happiest places in the world. But it also revealed, and we were one of the first though, we have a collaboration with Gallup where we show the differences in well-being across race and place. Now, well-being for those in general, it's the social, political, and economic factors that go into the question, how are you doing in general? We throw the term out well-being very loosely. This is a very tight definition that is measured with this survey. So it's not well-being, it is really, there's a lot of things that go into that measure. So I can also forward the group the survey material as well as the analysis that show the differences across race and place all throughout the United States.
Thank you, Andre. Olivia, let's come over to you. Help us to understand the realities that are happening from the legal standpoint of investment into Black people, Black communities, Black businesses. So one turn over to you.
Absolutely, thanks. So, Andre set the foundation for me wonderfully, I think, by explaining, the socioeconomic factors that go into our current condition. I want to bring some insight into what is happening legally, and how that particularly impacts you all as practitioners in the philanthropic field. So everyone is aware of the affirmative action decision last summer, what that did for the higher education community. What has happened since then is that Ed Bloom, the person who brought that lawsuit, has been hell-bent on not only undoing the progress in diversity that has been made in higher education, but he's coming after the progress in diversity in everything. I believe he filed a lawsuit against the military academy. He's filed lawsuits against churches, going after their tax exempt status. He has even there is, I don't think it's his group, but there has been a group, I believe, that's linked to him, in some capacity that they are suing, like K-12 school districts, going after their curriculum. And what we also know is that they're going after fees. So everyone in this room, I'm sure, is aware of the Fearless Fund, case that came out of the North District of Georgia, out of Atlanta, Georgia. And went up to the 11th Circuit, didn't hit this slide. So, the background, before I go into Fearless Fund, the background of the affirmative action decision, I trust that you all can read, so I'm not gonna go through all that, but, the notion is that, students no longer are able to, identify themselves by their race. There have been, the attack was, or the argument was rather, that colleges should not know anything about the racial background of an applicant. What that means for applicants of color is that, you know, because as we all know, that race is likely, most likely inextricably intertwined with your lived experience, particularly in this country, that you are not really able to talk about yourself as a person. But in the decision, Chief Justice John Roberts went on to say that students can talk about their experience with race in an essay, but the way that he did it was very amorphous, didn't really provide any context. It has left higher education institutions reeling, and it has left applicants reeling. We get the next slide. So again, because this is spilled over out of education into other sectors, following the SFFA decision, they went on a letter writing campaign. So they wrote letters to for-profit companies, large companies, small companies, higher education institutions. They wrote letters to members of Congress, congressional committees and Senate committees. They have written letters, or letters have come from attorneys general from various states. And it's all an effort to shield what is still lawful behavior. Because what we know is that the SFFA decision did nothing to impact any of the laws that implicate the work that you all do, which is Section 1981, which is a reconstruction statute that I'll get into in a moment. And so we're now seeing, in addition to lawsuits and demand letters, we're seeing legislative attacks as well. So Florida, Utah, Idaho, Arkansas, Virginia, Texas, a lot of states have passed what are known as anti-DEI laws or anti-DEI bans. And it impacts a lot of different things. We've been looking at a statute out of the state of North Carolina that very circumspectly prohibited speech about diversity in any political matter of concern in public employment. And they wrote it in such a weird way that we can't even, we're struggling to find ways to attack it. And it's impacting our education, it's impacting a lot of different things. And so that is, I wanted to explain all of that just so you can get the gist that it is not just you all that are feeling this restraint. It is truly affecting everything. So you can, for you all, these are this is a list of the lawsuits that have been brought challenging private grant making in different capacities. So Fearless Fund is the very first one that's highlighted, which I'll go into next. But I wanted to highlight Roberts versus Progressive Preferred Insurance. I think that's the fourth case down. That is a case that's otherwise known as Hello Alice. And the Hello Alice case, their program that would give small business owners, first generation business owners, access to vehicles for their business, that it essentially was challenged, but it was thrown out. So a lot of these lawsuits are not, being successful because they are incurring, technical challenges, in what we call the legal world standing. So all that means is you have, a right to sue, meaning you suffered an injury of some kind that is directly related to the behavior that you were challenging, and that the court is able to properly address it. So those are the three prongs that you need to satisfy for standing. That court in the Northern District of Ohio said that the plaintiffs in Hello Alice did not have standing. They did not meet an injury requirement. Because the pattern that we're seeing in these lawsuits is that they're saying, and these are white plaintiffs that are challenging these diversity programs, these diversity philanthropic programs. And they are saying, that we are able and ready to apply, which ordinarily is not the standing requirement. That's not the standing test. However, that same standing argument was used in the Fearless Fund case, in the next slide, and it was accepted by the court. And so I'll go into what that did briefly. So again, the law that impacts the work that you all do, particularly as it relates to Black and brown folks that are receiving philanthropic dollars, is Section 1981. Again, it was part of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which is the nation's very first civil rights statute. It was passed in order to enforce the 13th Amendment. Now, again, the historic landscape of this law, Emancipation Proclamation was when? 1863. The final and actual emancipation of the last enslaved Africans on this soil was 1865, Juneteenth. And then, you have this law being enacted in 1866. So, we talk about legislative redress and actually dealing with systemic, finding systemic and structural solutions to our problems. This is proof that there was an effort to ameliorate the ills of and the vestiges of slavery, right? But of course, backlash. And that backlash resulted in Black codes and the need for the second Reconstruction and all of these things, right? So, you get the next slide. So, Section 1981 made it so Black folks who, again, were newly emancipated would be able to engage in business. Why? Because business is one of the main ways that, we build wealth in this country as a capitalistic society, always has been. And so from being the chattel property to now having to make a way for yourself, there had to be laws put in place in order to facilitate that. And so that's what 1981 was. Again, the affirmative action decision last summer did nothing to touch. It got nowhere near touching 1981. So what you all do is still protected under the law, and it's still very, very lawful. There is just a fear mongering campaign at work in order to get you to take yourselves off the table, to take yourself out of this landscape, because they are operating with a scarcity mindset, right? That if you give them this money, that's less money for me, which we all know it's not true, and they know it's not true either, but they want to psych us into believing that that's true. Next slide. So the principal question that you all have to ask is the way that you structure your programs, your grant programs. Is it more like a contract, or is it more like a grant? And the aspects that showed up in the Fearless Fund case were that the agreement, I believe like the very top of it said, this is a contract. Like, so what courts will do is, because they believe in the sophistication of the parties that are making the agreement, it is what you say it is. If you say it's a contract, at the very least, they're gonna look at the substance as well. But if you say it's a contract, they're gonna take your words and use it against you, right? So we have to be very careful about the language that we're using to describe the agreements that we're entering into. Number two, there are three elements to a contract: offer, acceptance, consideration. And so the issue that typically comes up in these cases is whether whether there was consideration in the agreement. What is consideration? Consideration is a bargain for legal exchange, and so it's either, you gain something that is a benefit to you, or you lose something, and you incur a detriment, right? Like you're giving something up in exchange for something else, right? We all know what bargaining is and what that does. And so, this quote comes from the district court, opinion from the Fearless Fund case. And so just procedurally, if I can briefly, the Fearless Fund actually won their case in the trial court. The plaintiffs appealed, and it made it up to the 11th Circuit, and the 11th Circuit reversed the district court. So what does that mean? In the district court, in the trial court, it was given in testimony. The attorney said himself that it would not be a contract if there are strings attached, right? If there's something on the back end, a back end requirement of something that you're asking your grantees to do, that they otherwise would not have to do. So another element in the Fearless Fund case, they were asking their grantees to give up certain aspects of their IP. And so, because that, they incurred a legal detriment, right? That is something that they otherwise would not have to give up. They looked at that agreement and said that this looks closer, it's most likely that this resembles a contract than it doesn't. They reversed the district court and they sent it back to be tried on the merits. So now where we are in this case is still alive. It has not been finally decided, but what it should signal to you all is, again, how are we structuring our agreements? What are we saying? What are we agreeing to? What are we having our grantees agree to, that would suggest to a court or an arbiter or someone that will have to decide our fate outside of ourselves? What are we doing to suggest that this is a contract record? That's all. The other thing, as well, is ensuring, that what you're doing now, most of you are, philanthropic orgs, but I believe there are some nonprofit orgs, as well. Making sure that you can say that this work that you're doing is tied to your mission, right? And that opens the way for a First Amendment defense. If you can say that as an organization, you are doing work that is consistent with the reason why you were created, then that puts you in a position to defend what you're doing, not only to have the strength of the marital legal argument, right? But also this additional defense to say, we're doing exactly what we were created to do. The law allows us to do. And I believe this.
Thank you, I think we have any questions from Olivia, well, from the chat, either online or in person. Yeah.
If your organization's mission, if the mission of the organization is created change over time, and now your mission really is about movement building, racial equity, racial justice, and you use race conscious vision making in granting, does that still qualify? Does that is why you're created? Because again, the mission has changed with time.
So the question we have for those in the audience, from the online audience is, if your mission has changed over time and you're now looking to solve for some race-based injustices, how does it apply to you?
That's a fantastic question. I would say, like, at least legally speaking, we haven't seen that happen yet. So I wouldn't be able to speak to like what a court would say about it. What I can say is that it's not a bright line text or a bright line rule, right? I think you would have to be able to speak to circumstantially why that mission changed, what made you all go in that direction, to kind of show that it's not just, because again, even though we've not seen this in a court, I imagine that a court would find disingenuous a change in mission to achieve a profit margin. Does that make sense? And so, not saying that that's what happened. What I'm saying is, I think you would have to be able to speak to that motive, that underlying motive as to why that mission changed. And then also speak to impact, right? Like, so for example, if the mission changed because you see, like, let's say, I'm just gonna make a hypothetical organization, let's say organization X has had a mission that did not involve or was not racially targeted in any way. They saw a need develop in their community over time. They've been in the community, let's say 50 years. They saw a need in that community over time develop around race. And then they decided to change course organizationally from the top down, strategically, in order to meet that need, because they had resources and, so they were able to redirect that. I think that that is something that you would be able to speak to for, if you were challenged with a lawsuit and were able to invoke that person in defense. I believe that that's the argument that we're, I'm not gonna say whether it will hold weight, but I think that that would be an argument worth making. Additionally, bearing in mind that every organization has like tax, purposes and like reporting requirements, et cetera, et cetera. I think, showing that you are, that organizationally, that there is some kind of consistency is important as well. So I think in that case, if the mission changed, I think you would have to show a little bit something differently versus an organization that whose mission hasn't changed, right? But I think that kind of speaks to more ethos than it does, consistency over time. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Olivia. We want to give this panel a round of applause. We are going to have more time for questions and answers, but we will get some questions in the chat for Olivia and Andre, so we will have some more time for Q&A. So let's thank our esteemed panelists. One more round of applause. All right. We're going to go right into the next panel. All right, well, let's welcome up our very next panel. Do we have that seat? We do. All right, let's bring up Patrice Brickman, founder and CEO of Inspire Access. Welcome, Patrice. Come on up, Abby. Let's bring up Abby Levine, Associate General Counsel and Senior Policy Office at the Robert Woods Johnson Foundation. And finally, Harold Pettigrew, CEO of Opportunity Finance Network. Let's give everybody a round of applause. All right, so this next discussion is the funder's viewpoint, right? Thank you. So we're gonna have a funder's, discussion on why this, a funder's discussion. So let's start with Patrice. Patrice, we're gonna ask you the same question that we asked our panelists, and you introduce yourself. What is it that you're solving for?
Thank you for having me here. Thank you, Olivia and Andre. It's amazing. I'm the CEO of Inspire Access. We are solving for the investment gap, which is, I say it's an investment canyon. So kind of a riot that we call it a gap. But we're doing it in a fairly specific way, tapping into philanthropic capital. So there's $243 billion sitting in donor advised funds. We're a 501c3 whose explicit mission is to invest in for-profit businesses led by women and people of color. So that's how we're coming at the investment gap. And I'll leave it there. I'm sorry. I want to speak to two questions that you're not going to ask me, but I'll wait.
It's okay, let's have Abby. You can go ahead and do an introduction of yourself and what are you solving for?
Great, well, thanks so much, and it's so nice to be here. I'm Abby Levine, and I am an Associate General Counsel and Senior Policy Counsel at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And we are trying to transform health in our lifetime. We are trying to make health no longer a privilege, but a right. And we know that to do that, that requires tackling structural racism, which is one of the biggest barriers to health in our country. And we know, as Andre said, we cannot break our way out of that. And no matter how much money we have, how much money collectively we have in this room, in this community, across the country, we don't have enough. So we need to change the systems to be able to make that happen.
Thank you so much, Abby. And Harold, what's in your?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, Harold Pettigrew, President and CEO for the Opportunity Finance Network. We're not a fund. Sorry. Primary focus, and I'll introduce OFN in a moment, is to be money, it's communities. Simple. Our purpose for existing OFN, we are three businesses in one. First, we're a membership organization. Essential to what we do, we are. That membership comprises CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions. How many of you familiar with CDFIs? Good deal. A lot of hands raised, we're hoping for the real minds as well. We know CDFIs. So we have a real conversation. So our purpose is to invest in CDFIs, move money from investors, funders into those CDFIs, so we're investing people into. First, focus, membership organization, we're advocacy institution as well. We have team members that are on the Hill, working with the administration, as well as building new practice around the DEI, to work in the official space. And so advocacy will work very different for us as we move forward to influence. Third is movement. We exist for the purpose of supporting our members, and part of those major supports that they need is staff. So that's the purpose we're talking about. I want to give a little bit of foundation. Certainly who we are. We're nationally positioned. I'm a DC dude, native Washingtonian, work with many of you, so it's great to see friendly faces. Our focus is national, communities all across the country.
Thank you so much, Harold. Let's get right into the conversation since you already have the mic, right? Yeah. We have three questions we want you to answer as you frame your conversation, right? You're not a funder, you already said that. So we want to understand what it is that you all do and how you move capital. Why do you move capital for race-based? Why are you focused on race-based equity issues? Who's your target market? Because you talk about working nationally. And how are you all staying the course of your commitment to equity and inclusion in the work that you do?
Absolutely, all great questions. Hold me accountable, Jimmy, like I did wrong. Make sure I get to all of them. So here's what's important for us. And this is a little bit of a personal principle. I've been in OFN for a little over a year. The purpose of our work as an institution, my personal purpose as well, is to be intentional and impactful. I can list off a number of statistics where we invest. Andre just reminded us at the end of the many studies and data and analysis and all these other things. Do we need more data? And that's a real question, right? Whether it's national or local, what we know is this, that people in communities of color are worse off. If we want to draw a juxtaposition, you're going worse off than white folks, right? And so how we begin to intentionally invest is a critical question if we're being impactful about the work. Now, what we do, we're intermediate. We work with funders and investors, meaning foundations, family offices, major banks. We are looking to be an intermediary to move capital from those institutions into the institutions that are on the ground. Our membership represents over 420 organizations across the country who work in communities, who are working, who are intentional about how they invest, where they invest, and who they invest. Over 66% of the people that we touch across the country, from housing, small business, to childcare, is touching communities of color. A lot of our focus is on rural spaces. It's in native communities. Now that is one area, Andre, that I've actually looked at, that the disparity of space in tribal communities actually is pretty stark. There are 30,000 people in this country in the Southwest who are without water, who are without electricity, right? Or part of the charity. So when we talk about the work, to me, it's always important, whether it was before that I had the honor and privilege for 7 years, the Wake It on Shannon, who's in the back, the new wonderful CEO of Wake It, taking it to greater heights and territories. I had the privilege of working with both of you. What was important for me was always to focus on why the heck are you here? If you were here to invest in communities, then into communities. It means necessarily that if you're here locally, that you're being intentional about communities, because you can't just associate low income, low wealth. We can use all the articulations that we want, and people with lower income and lower wealth. There's a one-to-one relationship in this region specifically with communities of color. So if you are, and you're not intentionally focused there, you're not serving the mission your purpose. So that to me is the realness of the conversation. My purpose as an intermediary and being that central point, moving capital from funders and investors to CDFIs, is to ensure that when you lead these conversations, you know that if you were intentional and real about the work, then you have a solution. I promise you, there is not a way that you are looking to deploy capital into communities that I can't have a solution for you. And so when you're leaving these kind of spaces, and you need a vehicle for investing into communities, we have a partner who can help you. One of many on this stage, many across the country, right? And so to me, the point is, moving capital and all those things, but typically when I'm on the stages, it's a bit more of a real conversation about the willingness of funders and investors to be real about the impact of the money. And to get past some of the power that exists between funders and investors and nonprofits and communities, which represent the majority of our population. So that's the purpose of us being here. Large part of my responsibility is to move people to action on behalf of that membership. And so that's a large part of the reason why certainly I'm here. We can talk capital structure and all those sort of things, a solution, how we are investing, how can we do that? But it doesn't matter if we have to do it. So that's where I always like to start.
Thank you, Harold. Let's go on to Abby. 10 questions for you. We're here. What type of funding are you all providing? Anything for specific communities? Why are you offering these race-based funding, which you answered a little bit? How are you staying the course in the times that we're in?
Sure, so I'll try to answer all of those questions, or I may take my prerogative as hearing your questions and hearing from them too. Well, as mentioned, we're really working to improve the health of all individuals in community. And, you know, it was said earlier, we look at a lot of data, we fund a lot of data. We also recognize that, that we're not in a, as I think we started with, it's not, by helping Black and brown and other communities, it doesn't make white people or white communities less off. And by helping everyone, we are really lifting the tide and lifting, using my metaphors, but, raising the tide for everyone and improving conditions for everyone. And so we're a national foundation, and we work and fund in communities all across the country, as well as fund a lot of national organizations. As we think about our work, we're sort of tackling this in several ways. One is we're sort of continuing the work that we've been doing through our programmatic areas over the years to be able to dismantle structural racism, to try to make the healthcare system better and more accessible and affordable for everyone. And my job in the law department is to work with our programmatic teams to be able to do that. And I'll talk about that in just a minute, sort of following up on a lot of what Olivia talked about in terms of what we're seeing and where some of the challenges are. But I also want to focus on that a big part of the work at the foundation is taking a more proactive approach to doing this work. And I think when we think about philanthropy and a lot of conversations and a lot of things that I've read over in the last year or so, has been about what are we going to do and how are we going to tackle this, and are we changing, are we not going to fund these organizations? And those are all really important conversations. But we and other foundations have done this too, but have established a four-part sort of coordinated strategy to defend racial equity, diversity, inclusion, and race-conscious policies and programs. And in fact, we've made that a foundation-wide policy priority that's coordinated through our policy department to infuse all of the work that we're doing. And some of that has to do with funding both defensive and affirmative litigation related to race-conscious policies and programs. Some of that has to do with funding and doing our own strategic communications to counteract mis and disinformation about what we're seeing and hearing, and to be able to tell a more positive story about racial equity. I think, again, as Audrey mentioned, not only talking about the disparities, but really leading with the assets that we have in our communities, and how do we do a better job of telling those stories. We're also supporting leaders in government who are committed to racial equity. And many of these are the people who are on the front lines of dealing with this every day. And how do we make sure they have support? And then we're also working with leaders in other sectors, whether it's finance or philanthropy, civil and human rights, business community, to organize leaders in other sectors to ensure that their fields remain committed. So we're seeing this as a sort of proactive of how do we do that work? And though being able to support all of that work doesn't hit any of the legal quandaries that Olivia talked about, and are not areas that there are questions about, can we fund this or not? But one area that, or the biggest area that there are questions about, do we fund and how will we stay the course, has to do with when we're funding programs that are limited to or preference to eligibility by people of a certain race or to some degree gender. And we have been, and even before the Supreme Court decision last year on affirmative action, when we sort of knew it was in the pipeline, had been reviewing our own advocacy and grant-making practices. And we work very closely, our law department works very closely with our programmatic teams, and have decided that we are staying the course and that we recognize and we want to be intentional about when we're doing so and how we're doing so, and thinking about what our mission is, what our grantees' mission is, and as Olivia said, to be able to, as when we can tie it to our mission, recognize our First Amendment right to fund who we want to fund to be able to do the work that is critical to fulfilling our values and mission as a foundation. And so the biggest thing that I would say, or one of the many things I'll say, is to not think of the lawyers as your enemy. And I know too often we get pitted, and particularly in this field or in this area right now, seeing a lot of lawyers are not letting us do this and we want to do this. And, we are really working, and lawyers and foundations that we work with all over are really working at how to be able to do the work effectively and strategically. And I will say that to be as effective as possible, bring your lawyers in early. Don't wait till the last minute. Don't think, oh, well, we'll just do all this and then go to them at the very end because we don't want to. The more options, we have a lot more options, the less before we start putting things in writing. We have more options before we start making decisions. And so the earlier you can talk about that and say, this is what we want to do, and talk to your lawyers and say, how do we do it, can be really positive conversation. And so again, we're not shrinking back from our commitments. We want to make sure that our grantees are thinking about these issues, that our staff are thinking about these issues. But there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot that we should do, and I'll leave it there. Got more detail later.
Thank you, Abby, so much. Let's move right on to Patrice. So you have two questions you wanted to ask that weren't clear. So I want you to let your prerogative go and start off with the things you wanted to tell us before we do this.
I think really they do answer your question. I had, one thought I had, when Olivia was talking in particular, and then we talked about the Fearless Fund, that this is my opinion, But I do think Edward Bloom, and I'm gonna say his twenties, I think it's bullying. I think it's bullying, we've seen it before, people like to not see the last of it. And rolling back or changing our language in some ways is exactly what they want. So we're clear also on not rolling back and not apologizing for having to fund. I'm sensitive that I'm a white woman saying that, and I can't imagine how that lives if you don't look like me, but even more reason for people who look like me not to roll back, but and if we are targeted, I will be calling Morgan Lewis and Olivia, and, you know, I'm listening loud and clear. But I do think it's a bully tactic, and I think giving into that is, it's not, we're gonna, you know, like we're just doing what we want with regards to that. With regards to who and how we fund, and then I think I'm answering them. I think we're getting back on track with questions now, that we are providing investment capital. We're mobilizing investment capital into enterprise. Because fundamentally, barring spiritual power, which is a really strong power in this world, financial power is the biggest lever we have to change lives, period. So until we shift for financial power in this country, we're gonna wake up in 10 years from now, having the same conversations we are today with the same statistics. So in my mind, and enterprise and real estate, I don't mean they're hand in hand, but they both go back to changing lives and what Andre pointed to and what we all know about well-being, overall well-being. So that's how and why we fund, and that's how we're going to behave moving forward. The last thing I'll add that I think is important to name, and it also touches on something Andre alluded to, is right now, 98% of our investment dollars, over 98% are going to one small demographic in this country. Most of the great companies across the world come out of a human solving for a problem, right? Someone is solving for something, and they're solving it based from their lived experience, right? You have a lived experience, there's a problem, you come up with a solution, that's what companies get started. So by funding, by all of our funding being funneled into that one demographic, we're missing out on the solutions that are coming out of the majority of the rest of our country and their lived experiences. So, you know, it's a great, who I'm funding, people of color, it's a great investment, by the way. Period. So.
Thank you. Give me a round of applause. We want to open up the floor for the opportunity for you all to engage with this panel and be able to ask some questions, solutions you have. So I want to start with the in-person audience. For Harold, for Abby, for Patrice. I know you have some questions. Yeah. Right, you have it in mind, keep on.
So this is a question for the whole panel. So government dollars, well, philanthropic dollars are relatively small relative to government dollars. And so how can we, as funders, use our influence, our capital to ensure that government investment is staying in course and not not reacting in a negative way to the bullying and pressures that we're all
So, OFN manages over $1 billion in total assets. And a lot of that capital is not only deployed to CFIs, or source funds. We manage numbers of 700 different programs across the federal government. That's actually, for us, we serve as intermediaries to be able to aggregate that capital and deploy it to CFIs from the guarantee program, that program to the CFI fund itself, and source of capital. Because you're asking about federal programs, not the certain territory, maybe more position, depends on the administration. Right? And where there's an administration that's supportive of investing in communities, the type of programs that are focused on the capital into communities, then you have a situation where there is those type of opportunities where it's not about necessarily saying, of course, frankly, it's about private capital being mobilized to the company, federal resources. One example right now is in amidst. Right now, there's $27 billion literally that is going to be deployed into communities, specifically focused on climate. So greenhouse gas reduction into 3 programs, one of which we're a part of. One is going to be managing a $2.3 billion grant to deploy capital into CDFIs across the country. Now, we're charged with also a leverage element. And so the federal government designed that program with private sector and philanthropy in mind. That federal funds would in essence be used as seed capital or that first investment into an areas, frankly, creating new investment funds from a community investment standpoint, right? And so it depends, the short answer to your question is it depends on who's in leadership of the government. It's the reason why elections matter, right? The work that we're doing, whether it's the executive board, folks that are in Congress who supports budget standpoint, how programs are created, but then also the contours of those programs and successfully whether they are in the community. So I'll make it. Happy to expand for that.
Thank you, Harold. Thank you, Harold. Chris.
So Harold, I just want to congratulate you on your stewardship, both of personal wages, but then of going to OFN and another your stewardship, seeing a $2.3 billion award through the membership. That's important. I'm curious about, if you go a little bit deeper on how you see foundations and donor class funds and kind of what individuals directly contributing to, whether it's deposits or co-lending, what sort of optimal leveraging strategies are. And we'd love for the 2 representatives who are a little closer to spaces.
So that's a great question. So if you are an asset owner, asset manager, capital allocator, in those different sort of asset lenses, thinking about and leveraging the full spectrum of capital that you have access to, I think is an important one. I think that's the underpinning, I think, of what you're asking. It's like, what are the structures and strategies that could actually be employed to have impact in communities? So the spectrum of organizations that we represent, I didn't break it down. First, loan funds, minority depository institutions, credit unions, subvention firms, green banks, different types of institutions that are compacted for different purposes. All of those exist because our top tier financial institutions across the country aren't doing that. So there's different vehicles by which you can deploy capital. So some of the points that Chris touched on, just to name, your treasury management, like where your dollars sit, is very important. There's over 100, you can check in this, Chris, over 100 minority depository institutions across the country that currently exist where you can place your deposits. 150, 150. There are loan funds that you can deploy capital and be very strategic about how you leverage your balance sheet to support not only capital that can be deployed directly to those organizations, so that then they can fund, small businesses, particularly Black-owned businesses, or, housing projects, or childcare centers, you name the type of community, asset, there's CDFIs that can invest. And so how you use your balance sheet can be very strategic, right? In terms of direct capital deployment, you have guarantees that we structure using your balance sheet. There are different ways that you can actually leverage the assets that you have available to be in support of the spectrum of organization. Say differently, the infrastructure that's in communities that you can leverage to deploy capital. So that gets back to the point that's before, that I'm happy to rattle off different structures and even specific examples here. My goal is to make sure that you have enough information here, or at least teasing of information, that you know that you can talk to any one of us about options for investing in communities. The different ways that you can leverage your capital to be in support, from investment to equity to brand and general operating support.
Abby, Q, you wanna add to?
Sure, I'll just say that, in most of my work and what I do is focus on our grant and our programmatic activity. That uses 5 to maybe 6% of our assets each year, maybe 7 if we're lucky. That leaves another 90-some-odd% of the foundation assets. And we look at how we use our investments carefully. And over the last however many years, like so many foundations, I think we've really been looking at how to use those investments in our endowment much more seriously and impactfully. And I will get way ahead of my skis if I try to talk more about that. But we have a whole department that focuses on impact investing and how to be able to invest in different organizations and to move money in ways beyond traditional grant making. And so there are a lot of options out there, and I think it's possible for philanthropy to think about not only the grant making, not only the traditional programmatic work that we do, but how we use the rest of our resources and assets to be able to stand behind the work that we do.
Yeah, I actually just planning to have a competition here. We are just in competitions with PDMV to make that an offering for all the reasons you just described. So we're at the dawn of it, and it's exciting. You know, work that you're doing.
So we have one question for our audience that came in for Olivia, that we want to make sure they ask. How can Black businesses, what can they do, what can we do to protect ourselves with the attack on DEI? So that question was, how can Black businesses respond to DEI?
Great question. I would say. One. So. We have to think what you know, right? So, especially knowing that Black businesses are traditionally undercapitalized, right? I think if it's a direct attack on you, obviously you have to. But if it's a demand letter, if it's some type of other intimidation tactic, please ignore it and go about your business. Because, and I say that exactly, right? I say that because, and I'm making light of it, it's a serious thing, but I'm making light of it because it only works. What they're doing, you know how like they say you don't lose money in the stock market unless you take money in, right? In a downturn. You are only giving them power the more airtime you are giving there, like the more attention you're giving them. It is exactly what Patrice said. It is bullying. It is an attention seeking, attention grabbing opportunity. So unless it is directly affecting you and your bottom line, I would say please ignore it. Focus on what you're doing. If it is something that is giving you pause, engage your lawyers. If you don't have a lawyer, you absolutely can come to the lawyers committee We have a program called the Protecting and Advancing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative that we are evaluating the racial equity programs, and other business and really like just hiring practices, other things that are affecting the bottom line of your nonprofit organization, your philanthropic giving organization, or your for-profit business if you're on a certain size. And we are evaluating those under the law and giving you our advice, objective, legal advice, as, if you apply for a program and you get in, as your lawyers. And so, always engage your lawyers, as Abby said earlier, engage your lawyers earlier rather than later. We would much rather have a conversation with you to empower you versus telling you what you can't do. Because you decided to go and do your own thing.
Well, thank you, Olivia. We are going to end with one final call to action from our panelists, and then want to hear, as you've been thinking about listening to this conversation, reflecting all the work you're doing in your organization, what can you commit to? What's the call to action for your organization to continue to stay the course and not only raise constant initiatives, but investing in Black businesses as well? Because we didn't so much talk about that. We're actually a worker cooperative, so we're not a nonprofit organization, but we do a part of our practice is doing organizational, we call it LOL work, liberatory organizational life. How to change the ways in which you're operating internally to be much more liberational, to be able to work in communities, much more liberationally, redistribution of power and resources. And I'll say that work kind of falls into like the DEI spectrum and other people of color DEI practitioners over the last year, their work has changed, like 75% decrease. We used to get calls every month for DEI based work and was turning folks down. A lot of that has stopped over the last 6 months. So that has really been an impact that is felt for people who do this work as a practitioner too. So we're gonna do a call to action. We want to start with Andre. Final words for the audience today. What is your call to action? What is your kind of final thoughts to leave our audience with? And then we're just gonna pick up right for.
I would just say to invest in the underappreciated people and assets that can excite structural change. Most of my research is really focused on those things. If you added equity, they would grow and you would see a return. And so I think that holds true, but I think we should really be deliberate about investing in the people who are focused on structural change.
I have a screen ceremony, one of the screen ceremony. This one says, don't blink, don't flinch, don't give up, don't live. And when I need some inspiration for myself, when I need to find some grit, that's what I'm looking at. And so I would offer as a call to action to you all, don't blink, don't flinch, don't give up, and don't live.
And that's like that. Here, what about you?
What got you here won't get you there. Same practices that you all have had as philanthropy, as investors. You're my audience right now. Every time I have a microphone, I will continue to push to be bolder, think bigger, and do more. Which you have to, which requires. And so you have the vehicles to do more. Don't sit in your echo chambers. Don't sit in your small spaces on your own to just talk through what you can do. There are people in communities, those of us who are practitioners, who have worked for our careers and committed our lives to being creative and developing solutions at scale. We like that word for some reason. What the hell does that even mean? But solutions, wherever your dollars are, I promise you have a great solution. And I mean, and I can tie you to organizations that can help give capital to communities. There's no excuses. There has to be full-out commitment and willingness of philanthropic community whatever your structure is, whether you are a bank, family foundation, to an independent, whatever you are, whatever you are structured, you gotta be more. Because fundraising is one of the worst parts of the job for most organizations and communities. And it's because of you, and how you're operating, right? And I don't mean that to challenge the spirit of what you do, yes, but as foundations across the region, you should be pulling more capital together and thinking of how you can consolidate your reporting so it's not such a damn burden. And how you tackle the problems that are bigger than your one institution, work across your institutions to raise pool capital. Just focus on the people who can help you develop strategies for deploying greater capital in communities, all the levers that you have to pull. That's what I'm all about.
Don't give up. Don't back down. Be bold. And remember that people intentionally created the unfair systems and structures that exist today. Which is sad, but also means that together, and we need to do it together, we can intentionally remake them in a way that is fair, is just, and benefits all of us. More practically, I would say, as you're thinking about the work that you do in your grant making, put money into grants. So your grantees have funding for lawyers, for communications people. And so real practically, again, is we're dealing with all of these issues, so are small local groups dealing with it even more, who are really on the front lines of this work. And so provide funding so they can get the expertise and the guidance that they need, and where they can get it on the front end, to be able to structure their activities, to minimize risk or to take risk intentionally, but to do it smartly. And as funders, one of the best things we can do, and one of the easiest things we can do, is to add that funding in so they have the support.
Thank you. There's an old adage about don't say anything else, but everything's been said beautifully. So I echo everything, every single thing that was just said, and for me, I'm certainly going to continue to lean in to the conversation, and I'm going to continue to lean into the opportunity we're missing out on by not investing in some of our most brilliant and promising leaders and promising companies. So thank you all. This is amazing, amazing job.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you all so much. If our workers can come up front, we'd like to recognize you and our fearless leader, chair, woman, Dr. Marla Dean. I'm going to pass the mic over to her. We have a reception of just fine for you right after. So we'll see you then.
Thank you so much. This has been remarkable and totally, I would say fortifying, and that's really important. I'm Marla Dean, the Senior Director at the Health Equity Fund at the Greater Washington Community Foundation. And this amazing programming was put on by Gloria, Aubrey, Sharifa, Kelsey, and Celeste. So thank you, colleagues and staff who worked on this. It's been incredibly valuable. I want to remind my colleagues on the board to not leave so we can catch a picture with all of you before we go. And so please do that. And then now I'm going to do a hardship. You enjoyed this, right? So join us, become a member, support our annual forum. There are flyers around about who we are, what we do, and how we support the work, push the conversation, empower philanthropy. And so we want to make sure that you're part of us so that we can do this together. So I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for all that you do. And I want to ask you to join us on this journey to push these issues, to support our community, and to make it more equitable, more fair, more just, with greater well-being. So thank you so much.